In October 1983, 6 Komodo dragons were dragged in burlap onto the black sand of Pulau Ringka Kecil, a dying Indonesian island east of Flores that everyone had already written off, and simply left there to starve. Before we go any further, if you love true rewilding and wildlife comeback stories, take a second and subscribe, because there are more of these than you'd ever believe. It wasn't a rescue. It wasn't even a plan. A wooden skiff ground onto that volcanic sand at dawn, and 6 of the largest lizards on Earth were hauled ashore in sacks and rope. A forgotten quarantine measure, paperwork nobody expected to reread. The fishermen who dropped them had already stopped naming the place. One of the dragons lifted its head on the sand, forked tongue tasting the air, slow, unhurried, as if it already had time it didn't deserve. The island around it was half dead, overgrazed to bald red clay by feral deer and wild boar, its springs silted, its canopy thinning to nothing. Everyone assumed the same thing. 6 apex predators on a barren rock, no prey worth the name, dead within a season. There was nothing cruel in the assumption. It was simply arithmetic. 6 predators, an empty larder, 1 dry season to cross. Survival turned out to be the easy part. 40 years on, in 2023, a ranger named Adi Susanto beached there with a survey team. They came expecting to step onto the same barren rock the records described, to count what little was left and write the place off for good. Instead, they walked into a forest, a rebuilt one. Clearings closed over with young trees, birdsong where the records listed silence, water moving in springs that should have been dry for decades. And here's the strangest part of all. The 6 dragons and their descendants had done it almost without killing anything. Remember that. They rebuilt the island almost without killing anything. Hold on to how strange that is, because it's the whole mystery, and to this day, it's the thing scientists still can't fully explain. I'm Peter, and this is the full story of 6 dragons left for dead on an island everyone gave up on, and how they quietly rebuilt it. Over the next while, I'll walk you through 3 things: how the island fell apart, the one counterintuitive mechanism that put it back together, and the honest limits of what this one strange place actually proves. Because a Komodo dragon isn't just the biggest lizard alive, it's an engineer, a builder of its own ecosystem, as surely as a beaver or a bison, an animal that doesn't merely live in a landscape, but shapes it, moves it, rewrites it. And here's the part that genuinely unsettled the researchers. Its tool isn't its teeth. Think about that for a moment. This is an animal famous for exactly one thing: the bite, the serrated teeth, the septic saliva, the slow, patient kill. That is the whole reputation. And yet the mechanism that rebuilt Pulau Ringka Kecil had almost nothing to do with any of it. Its tool isn't its teeth. To understand what the dragon actually used to bring a dying island back to life, you first have to see exactly how that island broke, because the answer is the one mechanism most people have never heard of, and it has nothing to do with hunting. And that mechanism begins not with the dragons at all, but with the animals they were left among. Through the 20th century, with no predator to trouble them and every other threat long gone, feral Timor deer and wild boar bred into the thousands. Understand what that means on a scrap of an island. A deer with nothing to fear is a slow, thorough machine. It stands in one clearing and grazes it, not for an hour, but for days, for weeks, for seasons, down past the grass, down to the seedlings, down to the bare red clay beneath. The young trees never got the chance to root. Tamarind, lontar, the seedlings that should have held the hillsides together, cropped to nothing before they cleared ankle height. and once the roots were gone, so was the soil. The topsoil, with nothing left to hold it, washed off the slopes and into the sea with every rain. The springs silted and choked, the clearings widened until they met. By the 1980s, the island wasn't a forest with bald patches, it was a bald island with a few surviving trees, eaten alive from the ground up. Now the part most people have never heard, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The 6 dragons never needed to hunt down every deer. That was never the tool. To rebuild the island, they only had to change one thing, how the prey moved. Picture the deer you had in your head a moment ago, standing, grazing one spot to dust. Now make it afraid and watch what changes. A Komodo dragon is a slow, patient ambush predator. It lies motionless in the scrub for hours, and you never quite know which shadow is a fallen log and which is death, waiting. A deer that has learned that lesson does not stand still. It does not graze one clearing to bare dirt. It eats nervously, in short snatches, ears flicking, and then it moves on, always moving, never lingering anywhere long enough to strip the ground to clay. That single shift in behavior is the whole thing. The grazing pressure that had been relentless, concentrated in one spot after another, was suddenly spread thin and kept restless. And in the gaps the herd no longer dared to hold, a seedling here and there was simply left standing long enough to take root. Ecologists have a name for this. They call it a trophic cascade, and the surprising part is where it begins. It begins not with the killing, but with the fear of it. The predator at the top changes the behavior of the prey below it, and that changed behavior reshapes the plants below that all the way down. Fear running downhill through a whole living system. There is even a phrase for the world it creates in the animals that live inside it, the landscape of fear. Sit with that a moment, because it inverts almost everything you'd assume. The dragons didn't heal the island by force, they healed it by simply being present. By being a danger the deer had to respect. The number they actually killed barely mattered. The fear did the work, which is why the fix, once you see it plainly, is almost embarrassingly simple. You don't manage the herd, you don't replant the slopes or truck in soil or fence off the springs. You put the apex predator back and you get out of the way. 6 dragons, dragged ashore in burlap and rope, and then nothing. No plan, no follow-up, just fear and time. And then everyone waited. 40 years of waiting came down to one morning in 2023 when Ranger Adi Susanto's survey team beached their skiff and stepped onto the black sand to count what was left. What their camera traps and their seedling plots actually recorded, that is the part scientists are still arguing about. Here is what they recorded. The clearings had closed over. Where a 1980s survey had mapped bare red clay, soil so overgrazed it washed to the sea with every rain, there was now a canopy, young tamarind. Lontar palms standing where nothing had stood in living memory. Adi Susanto's team had come expecting a barren rock, and instead they were walking under leaves, in shade, on ground that held together underfoot. 6 dragons had rebuilt a forest, and here's the part that stops you. They'd done it almost without killing anything. Then the numbers came in, a 2022 paper in the journal PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, by a researcher named Renata Voss, put figures to it. Tamarind and Lontar seedling survival was up nearly 300% against the old baseline. Camera traps logged 41 bird species moving through the recovered scrub, where a 1980s baseline had listed 9. 9 megapods, those odd birds that bury their eggs in mounds of warm earth, were nesting on the island again, their mounds scattered along the slope like small graves that had decided to hold life instead. The island wasn't just surviving, it was busy. And the deer, the prey population barely fell. Read that again. The dragons rebuilt the forest almost without killing anything. That's the landscape of fear, made real, written into the data. The 6 dragons never needed to hunt the herd down. They only needed to be there, slow, patient, possible, so that a deer could no longer stand in one clearing and eat it to the dirt. The herbivores kept moving. The seedlings got their few weeks of grace, and a forest, given the smallest permission, does the rest itself. The dragon's tool was never its teeth, it was fear. Now I want to be honest about what this island does not prove. It's one island, one uncontrolled accident, a scrap of paperwork nobody meant to run as an experiment. There was no true control site, no second Rinka Kessel left dragon-free to compare it against. The fear cascade signal, the claim that fear alone did this, is somewhat contested. Some ecologists think the recovering springs and a run of wet years deserve more of the credit. And the dragons themselves are hanging by a thread. Maybe 11 animals on the whole island today, one bad drought, one hard season from collapse. I could dress this up as settled science. I won't. This isn't a clean law of nature you can bottle and pour onto the next dying place. It's a strong hint. But the principle underneath it, that a predator can heal a landscape by being feared rather than by killing, that principle is real, and this island is one of the clearest places on Earth you can watch it happen. The detail that stays with me is smaller than any of the numbers. The Manggarai fishermen, the same families who once stopped naming this island, who refused to beach their boats on it, have started calling it something new. Ora Hidup. Ora, their word for the dragon. Hidup, alive, the living place. They named it after the animal they'd spent generations fearing, and they named it for the thing that animal turned out to bring. The dragon named the living place. They aren't the monsters here, they're the builders. Think back to where this started. October 1983. 6 dragons dragged ashore in burlap and rope onto black volcanic sand, left on a bold red rock everyone had already written off. That black sand is green at the tree line now. Green right down to where the waves come in. There are more of these comeback stories than you'd ever believe. Quiet ones on forgotten islands, in dead rivers, in valleys nobody was watching. Tell me in the comments which comeback story I should find next, and if you want more of them, subscribe. There really are more of these than you'd ever believe. Thanks for watching.